So we're going to be talking about getting both legs straight up together. And then for those of you who ever want to play with piking up into handstand from the floor, then I will give you some exercises and some tips about how to do that. I'd like to remind you that this isn't something that I started doing after 3 days. I've been practicing handstand pretty regularly for about 4 years, and I was able to hold a handstand with both legs straight up on purpose after about 3 years. Now before that I was able to get it, but it was mostly by accident, or I would get it and then I wouldn't be able to control my coming down. That's a relatively short period of time actually. Don't let that discourage you. This is supposed to be a fun journey, and it is really fun to feel your body learning over time. So we're going to be talking about the more advanced practices today. If you're not here yet, then that's okay. You're going to keep this information and you are going to get here, and then you're going to have a clear path for how to progress forward. Once you're able to jump up into a handstand shape in your L hop, so with one leg straight up, or your half pike position, these are entrances we've talked about before, and you're able to hold those or catch some air, then I would say it's time to start thinking about getting the legs up together. Personally, I find that it's easier to get the legs together if one of them is already straight. So I tend to favor the L hop or the half pike position to getting all the way up into a straight handstand. You can get into a handstand from that tuck position, so that's when you jump up and your legs are bent and then you just press your feet up towards the ceiling when you're balancing. But just for myself personally, I find that I have less control over my core and my lower back there than I do with one of my legs straight. So what I'm going to talk about is how to get into handstand from those two entrances. So let me show you what I mean. So once you've practiced jumping into handstand with one leg straight up and you find some air, then you can start thinking about getting the other leg up there right next to it, right? So let's say I jump, catch some air, then I can think about getting the other leg up there like that right next to it. So that's one way you could get into a straight line handstand from that L shape. And again, I find it easier because that one leg is already up there and that one side of your body is already pretty stable. And then the other leg that's moving up towards it stays pretty straight, and I'm not just thinking about getting it back towards the wall, I'm also thinking about pressing it up, like lengthening up towards the ceiling. What didn't happen, which may happen to you, especially at first, is your back might start to bend and you turn into a banana handstand. And that's where those exercises from yesterday and the ones that I'm going to give you today will really help. Once you start getting into that straight line handstand with both legs up, we have to start thinking about controlling our hips more, and that involves controlling our core more. So let me show you one more time. And try to make it even, so if you always favor one leg, then kick up with the other one once in a while. Find some air. Okay, and both legs are up. And I also don't have my feet touching. I've got about hips width distance of space in between my feet. You can come up and get your feet glued together and press them together. So I would try both. I would try getting your feet stuck together when you bring them up there and giving them some space and feeling what's easier for you. If you have wider hips, then it will probably make more sense for you to, or it will be easier at first for you to keep your feet wider. And men can have wide hips too. It's not just a female thing. So I would do some trial and error. The only other thing I would say about that, about what I just did, if I ever felt that my legs might keep going backwards, I was pushing into the mat more with my fingertips. I was doing a little bit more of that spidery motion and pressing like away from the mat, just like I talked about last time. That's going to be something that's more important when you start getting into that straight line handstand. Like once you're in it, how do you maintain it? And it's gonna be your hands and your core. Let me show you one other entrance to getting into that straight-legged handstand, which is that half pike position. Again, you're always at a wall right now, so it would look like this. Okay, feet together, feet separated, okay? Always stretch out your wrists after you've been up in handstand for a while, shake it out. So that's another way. Once you hop up into that half pike and you're able to balance there, then you can slowly start to get both legs up together. And that time when I piked my legs up, my feet were together actually, and I was gently pressing my feet together. It helps my core and my inner thighs to engage more, and it also helps my legs move up together and not one kind of sort of after the other, right? They come up absolutely together. So all these entrances can offer you different ways of practicing and get different muscles involved, so you don't just strengthen one pattern. Now with that one, with that pike position, I want you to notice that at first my hips are beyond my shoulders. They're not in a straight line, like I mentioned yesterday. When you get your legs straight up into the air, into actual handstand, your hips cannot stay back there. If they do, you're gonna fall over backwards or move into your banana handstand and hit the wall. When you jump up like that and you're balanced, your hips are gonna be too far behind you. That's where they go naturally to counterbalance your weight in the half pike. When your legs straighten, I want you to think about moving your hips towards your head as your feet go up. Oh, nope. There we go. When I'm in that half pike balance, my hips are too far back. They need to be there for that half pike position. It's not a bad thing. When your feet go up into the air towards the ceiling, you got to think about getting your butt and your hips back towards your face, right? So they move into place and everything is in a straight line. Now that was valuable for you to see that my body wasn't doing that in the right rhythm just then. So my hips were coming back, but not quickly enough. So what happens, like I said, if you don't get your hips in line, is the weight's gonna be more back there still, so your body's gonna wanna bend backwards and go to the wall. Now to counter that, I did save it. Instead of pushing into your fingertips, you push into the heel of your hand, okay? So that's what I was doing. When I felt my body move into that more banana shape, I was pushing into the mat with the heels of my hands, which helped to bring my feet over my head. So your hands are really important once you're in that straight line for keeping the weight where it needs to be. I want to explain one more time that movement that your hips need to make if you're gonna jump up into handstand in your half pike, or if you're ever gonna pike up from the floor. This is going to be something you have to think about. So here are your legs, okay? Just straight, and here's the weight of your hips. So when you jump up into the half pike position, your hips are here and your legs are here. As your legs start to go upwards towards the ceiling, your hips cannot stay back here, because if this is where your weight is, you're gonna go backwards. Your hips, the weight of your hips has to come forward, okay? You have to consciously think about moving it forward so that all of the weight is moving down into the pelvis and then into your shoulders and into your hands. So the next thing I'd like to talk to you about is the possibility of piking up into a handstand. We've already practiced piking up into handstand from that half pike, or you know that that's available. You just jump your legs up halfway and then you get them up the rest of the way from there. Piking up from the floor is a different animal altogether. And if this is something you'd like to do, then I want to give you some pointers and my personal progression for how I've been able to do this. The first couple times I attempted this, I thought this just isn't possible for my body. My body just can't do this. I was telling myself that my proportions weren't right for piking from the floor. I just wasn't going to be able to do it. But even thinking that, I just kept going anyway. I wasn't going to let all my handstand work just stop. I was going to keep challenging that wall I was hitting. And eventually one day, 5 months after having that thought, like, oh, I can't do this, I just floated up. My feet just came away from the floor and I was like, oh my God, I can do this. This is something that's possible for my body. So I don't want you to think that if this is something you do want to do someday, that it's impossible. It's not impossible. You just have to know what your proportions are. Help yourself prepare the best way possible, which will be by strengthening your wrists and shoulders, as we've already done, and opening your hamstrings up, which we'll talk about today, because this will be more easy for you if you have more open hamstrings. I have 2 blocks back there because for me personally, I have a long torso. Most of my height is from my hips up to my head. I can sit across from people who are 6'2", and I'm almost eye level with them because I have such a long torso. And when it comes to piking, I have to really round my back a lot to get my hips where they need to be. Using these visual props again, when you're gonna get into a pike position to get your legs off of the floor, you need to get your hips as far back towards the wall as possible. And if you have a longer torso, you're gonna have a little bit further to walk to get your hips in the right position for the weight to be optimally placed. If you have a shorter torso and longer legs, then you may not need the blocks. I'm gonna show you what the blocks do for me. If you're pretty evenly proportioned, then again, you may not need the blocks. I find them helpful just to give my body like a head start, if you will. It gives me a few inches towards where I'm going anyway. To pike up into a handstand from the floor, you have to have your hands down, flat, shoulder width distance apart, and you need to walk up as close as you can towards your hands. Now you can see that to do that, it's really helpful to have open hamstrings and open lower back because I can walk up really close. It is possible to do this with bent legs though, so don't despair. If you're not open yet, you can still get up pretty close with bent legs. My hips are further back. I need them to be closer towards my shoulders, like more this way, more towards the back of my head. And because my torso is so long, I need to round my back a lot, which essentially makes my torso shorter. So this is the length of my torso, really long and straight. It would be more helpful to get my hips where they need to be if my torso was actually shorter. And so to accomplish that, I round my back. If you round this strap, the end from here to here becomes shorter than here to here, right? I'm essentially making my back shorter, and then my legs can more easily push my hips forward. And this is basically the position I would need to be in. And my hips are, pretty much as far forward as they can be now. And we kind of practice this with our Uttanasana walk, this thing. Remember this? And so you might need to round more or less than I do. And at the same time, I'm really pressing into the floor a lot with my hands. Now when I add the blocks, so here's without, just notice where my hips are in relation to my shoulders. And then I'm gonna hop them up onto these blocks. And then the blocks give me, 4 inches or so of a head start to get my hips backwards, right? So that the weight of all this can go more that way, which is gonna be really helpful because I don't wanna lift all this weight, half my body weight off the floor. I want it to be mostly in my shoulders before I pike up off of the floor. Blocks will also be useful if you have tighter hamstrings and you do wanna practice this, or you're in the process of opening up your hamstrings and the back of your body, then that's another reason why you might use the blocks. Now, to pike your body up from that position, you're probably gonna have to round your back to some degree. You're getting your feet as close as you can to your hands. You're pushing your hands a lot into the floor, and eventually your weight is gonna end up exactly where it needs to be, more over your shoulders, and your feet are gonna start to feel pretty light, and you might be able to get a little bit of air with your feet, and then you might come down. And that's a success on its own. It's showing you that you're getting the weight where it needs to be. Once you do get lift off, you gotta think about your hips clicking in place over your shoulders, exactly the same that we thought about for the half pike. So let me show you what this progression might look like. With a wall behind, you can step up onto the blocks. Let's pretend we have open hamstrings for right now, or maybe we do. Gripping the mat, I need to round my back and lean forward a lot. Again, the leaning just serves to get my weight out of my legs, which is gonna make it really helpful, right? So I press, round, lean, 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 woo! And I might lift my feet off that much, like an inch from the blocks. Whoop, and then down. So that might be your practice for a while. Just see that it's possible. Lean, float, and then come down. You could also do wrist taps, okay? So you grip the mat, do all of that stuff. You take one foot away and you try to tap your wrist, right? So at least you get the feeling of one foot coming off of the floor. And you get to feel how much this is really about your shoulders. Your shoulders might start to get tired. And again, don't do a lot of these. Maybe practice 10 to 12 of these and then call it a day. Come back at it again tomorrow. One magical day, you'll be here practicing this against the wall, and it's all gonna click. You're gonna lean and your feet are gonna float away from the floor. Because you're gonna keep leaning, right? And then you might end up plopping onto the wall like that, because your hips were still far back there, right? But still, you'll be like, oh my gosh, I came away from the floor, that's amazing. At some point, when your legs make it from here to here, you're basically in your half pike position, right? And you will have practiced that already, which is why this progression works so well. You can also do this with really bent legs too, okay? If you're not that open, that's cool. Just bend your legs and lean a lot. And the blocks will be super helpful for you, right? Because bending your legs makes your legs shorter. So you want the blocks to make them taller. The last steps were leaning forward with your feet raised up on blocks, and then you could lift one foot away and then the other, or maybe you lift both feet up for a second and then come down. I think that's a great practice, and you also get to open your wrists a lot, because as you lean forward more and more, your wrists are going to come into more and more extension. So I think that's a good way to let your wrists feel that without getting all of your weight onto them. And of course, before doing this, you would do your wrist warm-ups, right? Especially if you don't extend your wrists that much. There are a few more tips that I want to give you about piking fully up into handstand from the floor. Some of these are based on proportions, and we're going to have to figure out what our proportions are and how to use them to make the entrance into the posture easier. These two things I find make the pike up easier. Instead of piking up with your legs hips width distance apart, I find it easier, and I think most people do too, to actually come up in more of a straddle. You open your legs out wider and they come up around you in almost like a circle. Opening the legs out to the side makes it a bit easier on your lower back to get the legs up, because some of the weight is already out to the side. Another thing, if you have a longer torso, I think this helps in that situation. Instead of keeping your hands shoulder width distance apart when you pike up, actually take them a bit wider. Just like rounding the back essentially makes it shorter. When you move your hands out, your face comes closer to the floor, right? So essentially it's doing the same thing. It's helping to make my torso shorter, and that helps me to get the weight back and my legs up. Now, if you have super long legs or you're more evenly proportioned, you may find it easier with your hands shoulder width distance apart. Some people find it a little bit easier to actually turn the hands a little bit in. I've even seen people do crazy things with their hands all the way together, but just for simplicity's sake and evenness of weight, I would keep your hands about shoulder width distance apart, and then maybe just play a little bit from that benchmark. Let me show you the difference of piking up with your legs straight behind you, which is very, very difficult. Possible though, you can do it too. It's just harder. And coming up with the legs in a straddle position. So you could pike up with your legs straight behind you like that. Or when your feet lift off, you can play with opening your feet to the side and getting the weight out of the middle. Like that. So they actually go left and right. Forgive the posterior view, but in case that's not super clear, instead of coming up like that through the center, you come up and open your legs out to the side. Now with that though, if you're gonna straddle your legs open, you just have to think about controlling your hips. Now, the only thing I don't like about that straddle is that it makes it harder to control your hips. I feel like the hips with the legs out to the sides are like, oh, do you want me to back bend? Like, can we just do whatever we want now? You're gonna have to be a little bit more mindful of not letting your hips tip you backwards, and instead tucking your hips under. So when you're up in the air, not letting your butt go backwards like that, but actually tucking it under a bit can help, especially if you have a more flexible lower back. And for most people, your lower back is the more flexible part of your spine. So if you find that you're banana backing over and over again, or you're hitting the wall over and over again, try to tuck through your hips. If you have other inversions that you do or you're comfortable with, like headstand for example, you can practice some of these things, bringing your feet up close together. You can practice bringing your feet up hips width distance, and you can practice straddling the feet and then bringing them back together. And you would do that with a wall. That way you can train those leg movements, but you don't actually have to be in the handstand itself. So let me show you a hike without the blocks, and I will try to explain what I'm doing as I'm going up. Walk up as close as I can. I'm gonna do that same thing we did in that exercise. I like to lean back first and then lean forward and load my shoulders. And when I came down, you probably saw that I had to break that straight line with my hips, right? And then my hips had to go back towards the wall where they came from. So I was again in that, like a little bit of a back bend almost, as I reversed the pike and came down. And I straddled my feet a little bit. I didn't go way out to the sides, but when you start practicing this and getting your feet up on blocks perhaps, you're gonna feel right away that it's so much easier, it's so much less load on your lower back. Take care of your wrists, don't do too many of these. Once I start to feel like, wow, I don't really have any more in me, and this part of me is really tired, and my neck is tired, and my hands are sore, I don't do anymore. I call it a day, and then I'll come back to it the next day. Before we can start thinking about doing any of these things without a wall, we need to have some exit strategies. We need to know how we're going to get out of the position safely so that we don't hurt ourselves. And there are a few ways that you can exit handstand, and the one you choose will depend mostly on your body's ability and how warmed up you are. The first one, which is probably going to be the one that most of us use, is the cartwheel out of handstand. So once you start to feel like your body is really unstable and you're going to come out, you take your legs to one side, just like a cartwheel, and then your hands come off the floor, one and then the other. If you know how to practice a cartwheel just on the grass, you can always do that just like a kid does, you know, just put your hands down first and then kick your feet up and feel how your feet swing over and come to the ground. You can do that. Or you can use a wall, and you might also want to have a person with you to spot you to practice this exit. This time the wall is going to be facing you, like the front of you instead of the back of you. So I'm going to walk up against that wall and explain how you can practice exiting a handstand shape into the cartwheel. Put your hands down on a sticky surface, and I've got my mat right here. And you can walk your feet up via a chair, and you get your legs up onto the wall, okay? So it might be nice for you, just so you have more mental ease, if you have a person behind you to spot you, right? And so they could have their hands maybe like on your lower back to make sure that you don't banana back away from the wall. We can practice this cartwheel thing out to my left, it'll be your right. So if I'm going to come out of a handstand, this leg is going to come out to the side, this leg, and then the other leg is going to follow it. My hands can stay down, but the first hand that's going to come up is this hand. It's my right hand. It's going to look like my left to you though. So I'm going to go this way, and then right hand comes up, and then the left. And I would practice this both ways. I would practice coming out to the other side as well, so that if you lose balance and there's more space on this side or whatever, you're not just training getting out one way. So again, walk up via a chair or just with your legs, and you would on purpose take this leg out to the side. Your waist is going to side bend that way, and once your feet come down to the floor, you're going to feel this hand, which is on the opposite side where your legs are going, is going to come up first. Whew, just like that. 2 of those a day. Practice coming out to the left side, practice coming out to the right side, just so you get this feeling of cartwheeling out into your body. There's another way people do this where when they're cartwheeling out, they move one hand forward. They kind of walk one hand forward, and I can show you that, but just to keep it simple, because when you're falling, I promise you, you're not going to be thinking about, oh, I need to do this first and then this. It just needs to be simple and safe. But if you want to practice this, it can help be a little bit more gentle on your wrists when you're coming down, and it can also help to just move your weight further out to the side, especially if you are falling more backwards. Get comfortable with the first way first, and then practice this way. So you would cartwheel down the exact same way, except when you're cartwheeling out, let's say this way, this hand on the same side you're going would step out to the side, and then you would come down. So let's say I'm gonna fall this way, I'm gonna have to move this hand and step it out to the right. So once I feel like I'm gonna fall out, I actually step my hand out, give my body, my shoulders more space, and then I cartwheel down. One more time. So this is, you know, a handstand-like shape. We're gonna come down to my left. And it can be a wider stance than that, right? I might come down and my legs might be very wide. And then come down. Please practice this cartwheel several times, right? And make sure that before you attempt a handstand free standing, that you can at least some of the time find that catch, right? And you're not just hoping you're gonna get it, because we wanna keep our bodies safe as we do this over the long term. Another exit, which is kind of like an in-between exit, it might help you save your handstand, is to change what your legs are doing. Find what we call a stag leg position. So if you're in straight leg handstand and you feel like really wobbly and you're about to lose it, you can bend one leg, okay, like towards your nose. So let me show you what I mean. You can bend one leg, and this bringing the knee down into your chest can help to tuck your hips, because if you're falling backwards, your hips are not doing that, they're doing the opposite. So bringing one knee down into your chest can help you to not fall backwards. You can bend both legs too, right? So you can practice that as well if you're more comfortable with your body staying in one plane and you don't like the cartwheel moving out to the sides, that's not like an official exit, but I have found it helpful to not fall back so much. The last exit is only available if you have a wheel pose in your practice or a deep back bend and you've warmed up your back. The last exit would be if you're gonna fall backwards, which is most of the time what happens, you would just let your weight continue back there. You would bring your feet down to the floor behind you and you would end up in a back bend in wheel pose. Now, wheel pose is another very advanced, challenging posture, so I can't stress enough that you don't just want to let your body end up there if you haven't practiced the posture. I would just stick with using the wall, which is probably the best exit strategy for a while. If all of that is fine and you're like, okay, I get that, I can do wheel and I'm just gonna fall backwards sometimes, then what you need to know is as you're falling backwards, you want your feet to be pointing down at the floor, so you don't want your legs to be straight out, right? You want to bend your legs at the knees so that your feet are going to hit the floor, and you want to tuck your chin in towards your chest. So as soon as you feel like you're going to fall and you're going to do wheel, then you tuck your chin, you bend your legs, and you let your feet hit the floor. It's going to feel terrifying the first few times. It will. The first few times I fell out and did it that way, it did actually help me break through the fear. Fear is one of the biggest things that prevents people from getting into a handstand. Even if they have the skills, even if they have the strength, even if they can do it perfectly at the wall. If you take the wall away, that fear of falling and really hurting yourself can prevent your body from performing the way it can perform, right? Your nervous system is like, oh my God, like that's a really far way to go. And you also can't see what's happening when you're falling. So I understand there's a lot of things that happen psychologically and in our nervous system when we're falling. So again, I'm not taking this lightly. And all of these exits help you to address that fear and kind of confront it, but still using your safety zone so that you can start in a more prepared way playing off of the mat. So let me show you what that would look like if you were in handstand and you were banana backing and you were like, okay, I'm just gonna go with it and fall into a wheel pose, what you would do. All right, so with that one, if you're kicking up and your leg goes too far, I tucked my chin right away once I felt like, okay, my back has bent too far for me to save it. I need to tuck my chin, and whichever leg is further this way here, I need to bend it so that foot can touch the floor. If you were in straight leg handstand, the same thing would apply. You would tuck your chin right away, you keep your hands exactly where they are, and you let your feet come down, and in that case they would be more or less at the same time. And then you can lower down onto your back. Some people do this on purpose. They'll come into handstand and then they'll go into a back bend after that. But we're talking about using this as a possible exit strategy. And it doesn't have to be a pretty wheel, okay? So if you come into wheel and you're like this, that's fine, right? And then you just come down the rest of the way. If this is too scary, at least you've done it once if it's in your practice, and you can always scoot up closer to the wall and just say, okay, I'm not quite ready for this yet. I want to strengthen my handstand skills separate from this and then come back to wheel. So if that is something you want to be able to do as an exit, wheel should become a part of your home practice or getting into a pose like wheel. Now we're going to talk about our drills. The first one I feel like has been one of the biggest reasons I can do handstand as well as I can now. It is doing boat pose, which is a core stability and hip flexor exercise, and then canoe, which is the same thing. You're just more opened up towards the floor, and you move between the two. You come up into boat and down into canoe. This was completely impossible the first time I did it. I was like, oh my God, there's no way I can do this. I couldn't do like one, and my core was on fire. But I've kept up with it and I tried to do 5 of them every single day. It's really challenging. Don't be deterred. I know it's going to be really hard. Now I can do it and it's somewhat of a challenge, but I don't feel that burn anymore. My core and my hip flexors are just really strong, and those are things you need to have strong for handstand. So let me show you this drill. The first step is you find boat pose. So full boat pose is really challenging. It's where you're sitting and your legs are straight out and you might be reaching forward. If that's like, wow, no way, that's impossible, then just start with your feet down and you can hold behind your knees perhaps, or just reach your arms out. We're trying not to round our back as much as possible. We're trying to keep it more straight. And you would hold this for, let's say, 3 breaths. And you keep thinking about lifting your chest up. And then after 3 breaths, you come down into canoe. So if your legs were bent, I would definitely straighten them out and give yourself the challenge here. Legs are straight, hovering, and you can reach towards your feet. After canoe, you would pull yourself back up into boat, your version of boat, either this or this. I would hold for another 3 breaths. And I would be shaking a lot too the first couple times I did this. And then you'd roll down into canoe. I guess this is fine as long as your feet are kind of light. This is better. And then pull yourself back up into boat. And by this time, if this is the first time you're doing this, you're gonna be like, oh my God, I can't do anymore. When it's painful, stop. Maybe try to do just a little bit more after that and come back to it the next day. And this is gonna get easier and easier and easier, I promise you, the more you do it. Another helpful core strengthening drill is doing towel slides. So for this one, you would get your hands flat on something stable, like your yoga mat on a hardwood floor, and you would need to have some clear space and a towel or socks so that you can slide back and forth onto the floor. So I have my mat here, and then you need a towel or put socks on. And then you come up into a standing forward bend kind of thing. So get your hands flat, get as close as you can comfortably, and if you have tighter hamstrings or you're still opening them, then just bend your knees, that's totally fine. But your hands stay the same place the entire time, they don't move. We have our feet, the balls of our feet on this towel, or you have your socks on, about hips width distance apart. And now you breathe in and you slide your feet back into a plank, a high push-up position, okay? And then don't go back too far and don't back bend. And then as you breathe out, you're gonna pull your feet back up as close as you can, okay? And again, you can bend your knees. I don't want you to lean your weight back. You wanna keep the weight forward in your arms. And that's 1. And then you breathe in and you slide your legs back again. Plank. Breathe out, pull, slide up with your feet, use your core. I want you to keep the weight in your hands the entire time. Breathe out, pull up, pull up, pull up. If you can, keep your legs straight. Phew. And then once you need to take a break, lower your knees, stretch your wrists out, shake your wrists out. And that one, that one really gets all of your abdominal muscles, especially the one that runs up and down here. So this, combined with that boat and canoe exercise, is really gonna get the entire front of your body, even here in your pecs and your inner arms, I can feel it. Strong and more prepared to keep you upright in a handstand. And the last drill, I'll call it, which is really just a pose, is helpful for those of you who are piking up, either from jumping or you want to get there from the floor. What you'll notice as you practice your piking stuff, you're really gonna feel that this part of your back right here really works a lot. So when I'm piking up, I'm rounded first, right? And then my back essentially has to lift my legs up into the air. So my back is doing all of that work. Just the center line of your back, for sure, we need to strengthen. For this one, I would put something soft underneath you, like your yoga mat, maybe a bath towel under your hips, or do this on a carpet, because for this one you're going to be facing down on the floor, and when you lift yourself off of the floor, sometimes your hip bones can kind of grind into the floor and it's not very pleasant. So I would put some padding under where your hips are, which I'm gonna do right now. We're gonna lie face down on the floor, and you can have your arms behind you, like by your sides, and you can just bring your forehead down to the floor. First, I'd like you to breathe in and lift your forehead and the center of your heart, like your breastbone, off of the floor. So I'm not lifting up very high, and I'm not lifting everything, but as you lift, you should be able to feel the back start to work. And then you breathe out and relax. Again, breathe in, lift your forehead, lift the center of your heart, look down at the floor. You can lift your arms up too. Breathe out, come down. And then a third time, you can breathe in, lift your forehead, lift your heart. You can lift your arms up and reach back towards your feet. And you can actually lift your feet up now as well. And I've got space in between my feet. I'm not gluing them together. I feel my back working for sure. And then come down. You can rest on the side of your face too. So these drills have helped us strengthen the front of our body and the back now. So throughout this entire weekend, you have things to strengthen your wrists and your shoulders, your hip flexors, your core, your back. And putting all this together will help you to hold and progress fairly quickly in any kind of handstand that you want to do. And now these next postures are to help you prepare for piking up from the floor. Even if you don't want to pike up from the floor, all of this is going to help you to hold whatever kind of handstand you want better. The first few are about your hamstrings. As you've seen throughout this weekend, a lot of these things are easier when you have open hamstrings, and your hamstrings aren't living by themselves. They're connected to your calves and your lower back and everything in the back of your body. So we need to help our hamstrings open as well as our lower back. The two poses I want to give you for helping those areas to open are forward bends, because forward bends stretch the back of your body. And for this one, you can just sit on the floor or on your mat. I want you to sit with your legs bent at first. What we don't want is to come into our forward folds and for our back to be really rounded like this, and for our hips to be tucked back into space. You're not going to get anything out of this. Sit on your sit bones with your legs more bent, and then to come into the forward fold, you would lean forward towards your thighs as much as you can with your back. Your stomach and your thighs will press together. And when you can't go forward anymore, you reach forward. You can touch the floor, you can touch your feet. Your shoulders can round slightly. And for some of you, you're already gonna feel a stretch here. And we're looking for a stretch under here, behind the thighs. Some of you might feel it on your back as well, or even on the outside here. Any of these places are just fine. If you don't feel anything, then what I would like you to do from here is to inch your feet forward a little bit at a time until you start to feel something in those places, either behind here or on your lower back. And I would hold this for about 5 or 6 breaths. So one breath might take this long. Six of those. And then to come up, I would slide my hands back and sit myself up. And this is what it would look like from the front. You can have your feet close together, or you can have them hips width distance. You can try either. You're gonna stretch your hamstrings in either case. And then the next hamstring stretch, you can just stay seated exactly as you are, but open your legs up into the straddle position. This is another place to practice the straddle if you wanted to do that in your handstand pike at some point, right? Or if you do headstand and you want to straddle, might as well practice the straddle position on the floor. And there's even a standing position that does this straddle. But for right now, we'll just stay on the floor. Same thing, if you sit and your butt is tucked under like this and your back is really rounded, then we're not going to be getting anything out of the posture. So what you want to do, you're going to roll your hips forward. If you have tight hamstrings, this is going to feel hard to do. So you might bend your knees somewhat, tilt forward. You could even put bed pillows under here, right underneath your knees to support them. You might already feel it here. If you already feel stretch here And back here, then just stay right here where you are and just keep breathing. If you don't feel anything, then you can put your hands down on the floor and you can start to lean your body weight forward. Stay here for 5 breaths. You can bend your legs. Take your feet together and we'll have one more, and this one is more about stretching your inner thighs, your groin, and your lower back. Some of your inner thighs act like hamstrings, so it's helpful to stretch in here too. This is called your butterfly position. So you let your knees open, and everyone's hips are different and everyone's muscle openness is different. So some of you guys might be up here, some of you, your knees will fall down towards the ground more. Same thing, if you sit and your knees are really high and your back is really rounded, I don't want you to move forward yet because you're not gonna get anything out of this. We want the knees to be at least in line with the hips. So you see how my hips are down here and my knees are up here? I want them to at least be level. So in order to accomplish that, if this is what I look like, I need to lift my butt up on something. So I would find like a bed pillow so that my knees can be more in line with my hips. If you sit upright like this, you might feel some stretching on your inner thighs. Let me turn. If you feel like you could do a little bit more, then you could start to lean forward, and it's farther to go if you're up on a pillow. And you could put your hands down on the floor or on more pillows. And the more you lean forward, the deeper probably the stretch will become in your groin and your inner thighs, and you may also feel it in your lower back. These are all great places to feel the stretch in this pose. Stay here for 5 breaths. For anything that I'm showing props for, you can find household items to replace those with. You don't have to have yoga props in particular, although the blocks can be very helpful. The intention is for you to keep this information and to keep building with it. You will always have more things to add and to make your practice more challenging so that you can continue to grow. Just let your body learn at its own pace over time. Don't put a time limit on it. Just let things happen as they're going to happen. As long as you continually challenge yourself a little bit every day and don't overdo it and give yourself rest, you are going to progress as quickly as your body wants to progress and accomplish this. There are some things in here that I showed you that a year ago, a year and a half ago, I didn't think was possible for my body. I didn't think I could do. And now I know how to do it and I know why I can do it, and now I'm teaching it here. So I'm still on this journey too. I'm not 100% there with everything that's possible in handstand, but I'm continuing to grow and continuing to push myself. I'm here for you guys if you have any questions or if you need encouragement. I would love to have your feedback. Thank you so much again. Happy practicing. Please start this practice in hands and knees or all fours. You can breathe in and arch your back, and then breathe out and round your back for cat and cow. Just repeating a few times to warm up your spine. And deep breaths in and deep breaths out. From there, you can walk your hands forward a little bit, tuck your toes under, and then lift your knees off the mat, looking back at your knees to find downward facing dog. Just an easy moving downward facing dog. You can pedal out your legs. Just starting to warm up the backs of them. And then you can walk your feet up towards your hands, towards the top of your mat. You can bend your legs and rest your chest on your thighs. So you're in a forward fold. And you can roll your wrists. Just make circles with them. And then from here, with your fingertips on the mat for balance, go ahead and step your left leg to the back of the mat and drop your left knee down. You can lift your torso up and put your hands, both of them, on your right thigh, so you're in a low lunge. And we're going to use this shape to continue to warm up the hips and the legs. As you breathe in, you can lift up a little bit out of your hips and then breathe out and sink down. With your last breath in, you can reach up over the head with the arms, and then breathe out and bring the arms down to the floor. When your hands are on the floor, you can straighten your right leg and just stop when you feel the stretch in your hamstring, which is the back of that right thigh. Take a few breaths there. And then you can bend that right leg coming forward into the lunge. Step your right knee back beside the left, tuck your toes, and lift up again into downward dog. From down dog, walking up towards the top of your mat again where you started. And we're going to take the other side. So take a big step back with your right leg and drop your right knee down. Lifting your torso up into a low lunge with your hands stacked on top of your left thigh. And then you can pulse a bit here in your hips. You can breathe in and lift up a little bit higher by pressing into that left foot, and then breathe out and sink down. With your third breath in, you can reach your arms over your head, and then breathe out, hands come down on either side of the left foot, and you can straighten the left leg. Your leg may not be entirely straight, that's fine, you're just feeling for the stretch in the back of the thigh. And then come forward. Again, we're going to step that left knee back beside the right knee. And we're going to lower all the way down onto the floor from here. So all the way down onto the belly. You can rest your arms along your sides and your forehead down on the mat. As you breathe in, you can lift your forehead and lift your heart off of the floor, so we're in that back exercise. And then breathe out and relax down again. Breathing in, coming up a second time, and this time you can lift your hands up as well. Breathe out and lower down. And then third time we'll lift everything. So breathe in, lift your head, your arms, and your legs off the floor. And then breathe out, lower down, and relax. We're going to come back up from here so you can plant your palms by your sides. Push yourself up into tabletop or hands and knees. And then again into downward facing dog. And walk your feet up towards your hands, maybe like halfway. You can use that as an opportunity to stretch your wrists just by flipping your hands over on the floor. So we're prepping our wrists for some handstand hops. So you can pick one leg to be your kicking leg, that one stays on the floor, and just play with taking a couple of hops towards the wall. You might catch it, you might not, that's fine. We're just getting our practice in. Maybe after 3 times, switch legs, so give the other leg a chance to hop. Remember to use your hands, keep your hips gently tucked. And then you can lower down into a child's pose, so your hips are back towards your heels. I like to bring my arms in close sometimes to rest the shoulders. And we're going to play with jumping up with both legs a few times. So come back up into a very short downward dog, and you can bend both legs, and you're going to jump up with both of them. And you might catch it, you might not, it's totally fine. If you hit the wall, just come on back down and try again. Maybe about 2 or 3 hops. If you find some air or catch yourself for a moment, celebrate that. And then we won't overdo it. Come on down. You can sit or kneel on your feet for a moment. You can drop your ear towards one shoulder and then the other to stretch your neck. So now we're going to play with our towel slides. Here is a variation of it. Instead of being on your palms, you can lower down onto your forearms. This is just nice if your wrists are tired, and we've been on the wrists a bit already. So you breathe in and slide your feet back into a plank, and you breathe out and try to slide your feet back in. And this one, you might bend your legs a lot more. That's totally fine because we're lower to the ground. You can try up to 3 of those and then come into child's pose. Just rest exactly where you are for a moment. And then we're going to come back onto the mat in a seated position and prepare for boat pose. This is a tough one. Remember, you can take boat pose with your legs bent, And as you breathe in, go ahead and lower down into canoe. So the shoulders are not on the floor there. And then go ahead and breathe out and pull yourself back up into boat, any version. And then go ahead and breathe in and come down again. You might straighten the legs there in canoe. Breathe out and pull yourself back up into boat. And maybe a third if you're up for it. So lower down, legs are strong, and pull yourself back up into boat. And then just relax completely flat onto your back on the floor. You definitely deserve it. We're going to move into a twist by bringing both knees into the chest. And you can breathe out and tip both legs towards the left. Just take a few relaxed breaths there. You can have your arms gently open to either side of you. And then with legs bent, bring your knees back up to the center and then breathe out, tip your knees to the right. Take some full, slow breaths there. And then back to the middle. We're going to bring the knees into the chest, gently roll to one side, and come up into seated. We're going to take our forward fold to stretch our back and hamstrings some more. So sit with your legs bent to start, and then lean forward with your upper body, and then your arms second. You can round through your back, and then if you don't feel enough stretch, then you can continue to straighten your legs and build up a comfortable stretch. Pausing here for a few breaths. Gently rise up, and you can take a cross-legged seat or any comfortable seat just facing forward. And let's just take a few shoulder rolls to break up any last tension that we created around the neck and shoulders. And then you can simply pause for a moment in your seated position, eyes opened or closed, taking a few breaths to just relax. Breathe out any tension from the body before you go about the rest of your day.